Eventually, I forced myself to continue. I adjusted the camera settings, took a deep breath, and stepped back into the frame. The sun had climbed higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the meadow. The light danced through the trees, creating patterns on the ground that shifted with every passing breeze. Despite my lingering unease, I found solace in the beauty surrounding me. Slowly, I began to move again, letting the rhythm of the wind guide my poses. But this time, something was different. My movements felt less inhibited, more fluid. Perhaps it was because I knew someone else had witnessed my vulnerability, or maybe it was because I'd started to embrace it. Whatever the reason, I felt more connected to the environment than ever before. Each click of the shutter captured not just my body against the backdrop of nature, but also the emotions swirling inside me: uncertainty, curiosity, liberation. When the session finally came to an end, I packed up my gear with a sense of accomplishment mixed with lingering introspection. As I retraced my steps along the trail, I replayed the encounter in my mind over and over. Who was that woman? What was she doing out here alone? And why did her brief appearance leave such a lasting impression? By the time I returned home, the day's events weighed heavily on my thoughts. I uploaded the photos to my computer, scrolling through them with a critical eye. Some were stunning, the way the sunlight filtered through the trees, the reflection of the sky in the mirror, but others felt incomplete, as though they lacked the emotional depth I'd hoped to convey. Still, there was one image that stood out. In it, I was mid-motion, arms stretched toward the sky, my face turned upward as if reaching for something intangible. The composition was perfect, but it was the expression on my face that caught my attention. There was a vulnerability there, a rawness that mirrored exactly how I'd felt when the stranger appeared. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept returning to the woman in the woods. Was she local? Had she come from Cedarbrook, or was she simply passing through? More importantly, what had she thought of me after leaving the meadow? Did she see me as reckless, brave, or something in between? These questions gnawed at me, keeping me awake long after the rest of the house had fallen silent. The next morning, I decided to revisit the meadow. Not to take more photos, but to see if I could find any trace of her. It was a foolish idea, I knew, but I couldn't shake the feeling that our paths crossing had been significant somehow. Maybe I wanted answers, or maybe I just needed closure. Either way, I packed a small bag with water and snacks and set off once again. As I approached the meadow, I scanned the area for signs of recent activity. The ground was soft, and footprints were easy to spot, but none matched the distinct tread pattern of hiking boots I remembered seeing yesterday. Disappointed but unsurprised, I sat down on a rock near the edge of the clearing and gazed out at the mountains in the distance. The view was breathtaking, as always, but it didn't hold the same magic without the mystery of the unknown. Just as I was about to leave, I noticed something glinting in the grass nearby. Curious, I walked over and picked it up. It was a small brass compass, worn but functional. Engraved on the back were the initials JM. A surge of excitement coursed through me. Could this belong to the woman I'd encountered? If so, it meant she'd been here recently and perhaps even planned to return. Over the next few days, I became obsessed with finding her. I asked around town, describing the woman to anyone who would listen. Most people shrugged, saying they hadn't seen anyone matching her description. But then, late one afternoon, I stopped by the local cafe and struck up a conversation with an elderly woman named Margaret, who often hiked the trails herself. "Oh, you mean Jane?" she said, her eyes lighting up. "She's a regular around here. Comes in every couple of weeks to stock up on supplies. Quiet gal, keeps to herself mostly. Lives in a cabin up north." My heart raced. Do you know where exactly? She nodded and gave me directions, warning me that the road leading to her cabin was rough and best suited for four-wheel drive. Undeterred, I thanked her and headed straight for my car. The drive took nearly 2 hours, winding through dense forests and along narrow dirt roads. When I finally arrived at the cabin, it was smaller than I expected, nestled in a clearing surrounded by towering pines. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, and a wooden sign hanging above the door read JM in faded letters. I hesitated before knocking, suddenly unsure of what I would say. What if she didn't remember me? Or worse, what if she did and thought I was crazy for showing up unannounced? Before I could talk myself out of it, the door creaked open, revealing the same woman from the meadow. Well, she said, raising an eyebrow, this is unexpected. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then, holding out the compass, I said, I think you dropped this. She looked at it, then back at me, a slow smile spreading across her face. So you're the artist, she said. Come on in. And just like that, the story began anew. Stepping into Jane's cabin felt like stepping into another world. The interior was cozy and inviting, with wooden beams crisscrossing the ceiling and a crackling fire in the stone hearth. Shelves lined the walls, filled with books, jars of herbs, and various trinkets that hinted at a life rich with experiences. The scent of pine mingled with the faint aroma of lavender, creating an atmosphere that was both grounding and mysterious. Jane gestured for me to sit on a plush armchair near the fire, while she settled onto a worn leather couch opposite me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us was comfortable, yet charged with unspoken questions and curiosities. Finally, Jane broke the ice. So, she began, her voice warm and steady, you're the photographer I stumbled upon in the meadow. I nodded, feeling a blush creep up my cheeks. Yeah, that was me. I'm sorry if I startled you. I didn't think anyone would be out there. Jane chuckled softly, shaking her head. Don't apologize. It was refreshing, actually. Not many people have the courage to express themselves so openly in nature. Her words caught me off guard. Refreshing? That's not usually how people react when they catch me in the buff. She laughed, a rich, hearty sound that echoed through the cabin. Well, I'm not most people. Besides, there's something powerful about embracing your true self, especially in a world that constantly tries to tell us who we should be. Her insight struck a chord deep within me. I had always known that my photography and my connection to nature were ways of reclaiming my identity, but hearing someone else articulate it so clearly made it feel even more meaningful. You really think so? I asked, my voice tinged with vulnerability. Absolutely, she replied, leaning forward slightly. In fact, I admire it. Your courage reminded me of something I used to do when I was younger, something I haven't done in a long time. What was that? I asked, genuinely curious. Jane hesitated for a moment, as if weighing her words. I used to paint, she said finally. Not professionally, but as a way to connect with myself and the world around me. I'd go out into the woods, set up my easel, and just let the colors flow. It was my escape, my sanctuary. Why did you stop? I asked, sensing there was more to the story. She sighed, her gaze drifting toward the fire. Life got in the way, I suppose. Responsibilities piled up, and I convinced myself that painting was frivolous, a waste of time. But seeing you in that meadow, it brought back memories I thought I'd buried. Her confession hung in the air, heavy with emotion. I realized then that our encounter had affected her just as much as it had affected me. Maybe it's not too late to pick it up again, I suggested gently. Jane smiled, a hint of sadness lingering in her eyes. Maybe not. But enough about me, she said, shifting gears. Tell me more about your photography. What drives you to create these images? I hesitated, unsure of how to put my feelings into words. It's hard to explain, I admitted. For me, it's about freedom. When I'm out there, stripped of everything, clothes, pretenses, fears, I feel like I can breathe again. Like I'm finally being honest with myself. Jane nodded, her expression thoughtful. That's beautiful. And rare. Most people spend their lives hiding behind masks, afraid to show their true selves. You're doing the opposite. Her words filled me with a sense of validation I hadn't realized I was craving. Thank you, I said softly. That means a lot. We talked for hours, sharing stories, dreams, and fears. Jane told me about her solitary life in the cabin, her love for hiking and exploring the wilderness, and her occasional trips into town to stock up on supplies. I learned that she had once been married but had left the relationship after realizing it wasn't fulfilling her authentic self. Sometimes, she said, you have to choose yourself, even if it hurts. Her wisdom resonated deeply with me. I found myself opening up in ways I hadn't expected, sharing parts of my past that I rarely discussed with anyone. By the time the sun began to set, casting a warm orange glow through the windows, I felt a profound sense of connection with this woman I had met by chance in the woods. Before leaving, Jane handed me a small sketchbook. Here, she said with a smile. Maybe this will inspire you to try something new. Or maybe it'll remind you to keep embracing who you are. I accepted the gift gratefully, feeling a lump rise in my throat. Thank you, I said. For everything. As I drove back to Cedarbrook, the compass and sketchbook resting on the passenger seat beside me, I realized that my journey had taken an unexpected turn. What had started as a simple photography project had become something far greater, a reminder of the power of vulnerability, the importance of authenticity, and the magic of human connection. And as I looked out at the endless expanse of forest stretching beyond the road, I couldn't help but wonder what other adventures awaited me in the wild.